We are going to bring Will Freeman on to the show this morning. He is with the Council on Foreign Relations. They're quite prominent when it comes to studying international relations, and it turns out that he is a Latin American expert there. Obviously, we want to talk about Venezuela. So, Will, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
All right. Were you surprised to see the actions that were taken on Saturday morning?
Very much so. Of course, we've seen the president speaking for weeks and months about how Maduro, the dictator of Venezuela, shouldn't test him. He shouldn't test his limits. So I thought, I myself, for instance, said many times publicly, I think we'll see land strikes in Venezuela. I think we'll see some kind of escalation. But did I expect that we'd see 150 American aircraft flying into Caracas, disabling air defenses, seizing Maduro and his wife, and getting them onto an aircraft carrier, and then in front of in prison cells in New York State within a number of hours? I don't think anyone outside the administration could have seen that coming, or it wouldn't have worked.
Yeah, the many questions that I've had people ask me that I hope you can answer. My understanding is not a single member, this was a precision strike with the U.S. military, and not a single member of our military was killed, but that at least 24 Cuban protectors of Maduro were. Why is Cuba in there, if that's actually the case, protecting Maduro?
Well, that's the account that the Cuban regime is itself given. And this is nothing new. Since Maduro's predecessor, leftist President Hugo Chavez, came into office in 1999, since the early 2000s, you've had a substantial Cuban presence. We're talking, thousands, some say as many as tens of thousands of Cuban personnel, ranging from everything from doctors, nurses, to what's more concerning, the security advisors and counterintelligence operatives, who really form the kind of hard inner core, or did at least, of Maduro's regime. They would protect him from barracks uprisings from his own military. They would spy on other regime insiders, make sure that they were staying in line. And they would send back reports to Havana. In some ways, people saw the Venezuelan regime as kind of a client state at certain points in time. Well, they had that relationship to each other. Each would exert some control over the other. And so that's why we saw them there. The fact that the U.S. forces were able to neutralize them so effectively, it's honestly shocking. It's actually led many people to suspect, and I myself suspect, that another major regime insider in Venezuela gave the United States intelligence to do this, basically turned Maduro over. Yeah. I think it's implausible that the United States would have taken so little fire going in, would have lost zero casualties, and would have been able to pull this off all so smoothly and quickly, overriding Venezuelan defenses, had they not had that kind of insight.
Yeah, to think that we may have had a spy on the inside is really pretty incredible. So we're going to obviously learn a lot more about that. But let me shift, because we only have just a few minutes here. If the oil supply to Cuba is shut off, and I know one of the things you've been analyzing is what dominoes might fall as a result of what we saw happen. What, in your view, is the future for Cuba if they lose that source of oil in an economy that is already struggling?
Well, in a way, the consequences for Cuba stand to be even more grave than for Venezuela, because we've already seen the president say, unfortunately for me and disappointingly for many, that he's fine to work with a reshuffled Maduro regime for now. He's perfectly fine to keep that leftist authoritarian dictatorship in place. However, in Cuba, that's where we could, I think, very likely see the United States force Venezuela to cut off the oil supply. That's likely going to collapse the energy grid. So you're going to have an island that's already experiencing prolonged blackouts without power, perhaps in urban areas, for maybe days or weeks at a time. What will that do? I mean, could it drive mass protests? Sure. How will the Cuban regime respond to those? We don't exactly know. Of course, they'll try to repress them. Will they go the added step of shooting dozens or hundreds of protesters? That's actually something that Cuba, in its long existence as an authoritarian regime, it has not done that. It doesn't tend to fire en masse on protesters. So that would be a new and bold step. It could lead to protest cascade. It could simply smother them. But look, unfortunately, my prediction is, even if all those dramatic events I just talked about play out, I think we're going to see the communist regime survive in Cuba, unless there's also a U.S. military intervention there. Why? Because the military in Cuba seems united. They need this regime to survive in order to keep controlling the island's economy. Unfortunately, just a bunch of unarmed protesters, no matter how many they are, it's unlikely that they're going to be able to really change the balance of power there.
Will, if I could share just a thought with you. Will, you've been a great, source of information, and we thank you for your time this morning. What are your thoughts on the idea of, and this is something, of course, that a lot of people are chatting about, the idea that Greenland is back in the discussion and the potential for U.S. seizing the country of Greenland?
Right. You saw Stephen Miller, top policy advisor to the White House, his wife, post on X a map of Greenland covered in the American flag saying soon. Look, I think that's it's a different equation, right? I don't think we're not going to see a military raid on Greenland. I think we will see the Trump administration continue floating this as an aspiration, maybe looking at ways that a sort of Greenland independence or an independent Greenland could align more closely with the United States if that was to come to pass. But unfortunately, the dynamics are that the United States historically has been able to essentially just assert its will in Latin America, get its way. I say unfortunately because the consequences have often not been that great. In this particular case, we could debate that. Maybe there's an upside. But I think with Greenland dealing with the EU, with Denmark, it's a different situation. So I don't think we should think that Greenland is a domino that would fall. Again, maybe Cuba, but that's the only domino I'd put on this map.
What about the talk that Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping are watching closely, and that it might alter their calculations in any way? What's your take on that?
Oh, absolutely. I think they are watching. And for me, it's the biggest risk or downside of what we've just seen the president do. So, look, I think we all know that the so-called rules-based international order set up after World War II, it's fraying. Often even the great powers, even the United States, its allies will disobey some of its supposed rules. I think we all know that we're moving into kind of an era of harder-edged geopolitical competition where big countries will do as they please, weak ones will suffer what they must. I mean, unfortunately, we're heading that direction. But by shredding the kind of existing international rules, just basic respect for sovereignty, like we've seen with this move, again, regardless of what you think of it, if it was necessary or not to shake loose the Maduro regime, potentially Cuba, by just lurching in that direction and so clearly saying the United States will do what it wants when it wants without respect to these established rules, I think Trump is giving Russia and China the license to do the same. And it's not that they're not already doing it. They are, right? In Ukraine with China's threats to Taiwan. But now they're going to feel even more emboldened. And the question is, do we want to be in that world, especially with a China that has real defense capabilities, manufacturing capabilities? Do we really want to go head to head in a lawless, ruleless world against that Chinese power? And I'm not sure that we do. I'm not sure that we want to run so fast away from the alliance system we've built and the norms that we've set up. Again, even acknowledging that Maduro is a terrible dictator and that there may be some upside to what we've just seen.
Just a minute left here. What's your take on the oil situation? Will U.S. companies get involved? Will they hold back, waiting to see how this regime unfolds? What's the future there, and how might it impact the world oil market and oil and gasoline in our country?
Very briefly, right now we're in a moment of global oil oversupply, and prices are relatively low. So that, combined with the fact that there's still a lot of risks in Venezuela, we don't know how this will pan out. We don't know how the United States is going to secure the safety of any new oil investments. I think that it really depresses probably oil companies' appetite to get into the country. That may be part of why you saw the president just last night saying that he's going to try to incentivize them financially somehow. We'll see if that works. But I think in the short, medium term, it's hard to see the kind of investment rushing in that's necessary to get Venezuela pumping at its maximum capacity and really making use of its 17 to 18% of total global oil reserves. Now, in the medium and long term, if this gamble does pay off, I do think that we could see Venezuela return to being a really major producer, and that could become increasingly geopolitically significant in the 2040s, 50s, and beyond. So we'll see, but the investment does need to start soon, or otherwise, this oil is just going to remain trapped in the ground. And I think that that's the riddle, the challenge that the president's most focused on right now.
Okay, that's Will Freeman, everybody. We really appreciate your insight. Obviously, this is one of the biggest stories when it comes to world history, maybe in the last generation or so. Will, hopefully we can call on you again.
Thank you.